Welcome to the Talent Revolution, Tales from the Trenches. I'm Jill Caniglio-Kirk.
And I'm Joe Shambon.
Hey, Joe, I was reflecting on who you were as a young lad, right? I was thinking about, could you have been the kid at school who actually used the excuse, the dog ate my homework?
The dog ate my homework. Well, to be honest, Jill, no, the dog never ate my homework. But I can tell you this, I've had the excuse of, I sent it to you and it's in cyberspace somewhere. I'm sure everyone's had that problem.
Well, it's good to know that you're young enough that cyberspace was even a thing when you were a young lad in school. So I guess we learned something there.
There we go. But that leads perfectly into what we want to talk about today, Jill. You know, cyberspace, where are things going, what's happening, and, you know, the world of HR and TA. You know, we all believe the ATS ate our resume. I swear to God it has. And that's why we've included and invited our friend Mark Lane here. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Mark has a podcast that he started called Ghosted, and he is a longtime communications producer, education sharing here in Metro Detroit with us. And Mark, you want to take a minute or two and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me. I have a podcast called Ghosted by the Machine, which I started mid-October of last year. I'm a communications marketing professional. I've been in the Metro Detroit area for over 20 some years. Started out in broadcasting, working for the Pistons and WDIV in here, Detroit. Moved on to PR. Got into nonprofits. Worked with Goodwill. Worked with Salvation Army. I worked with numerous Fortune 500 companies: Ford, GM, Chrysler, DTE, Detroit Water and Sewage Department. Led campaigns, did advertising, and found myself last March on the sidelines. So it's been about 9-10 months that I've been looking for a new career or a new position in the real world, as I call it, and decided, after seeing my journey or experiencing my journey and other people's journey on LinkedIn and other sites, I said, you know, the stories out there are amazing. People are really finding it difficult. I'm finding it difficult after all these applications that I've filed. And I feel that I've got sucked into that ATS cheese grater and nothing's coming out. I'm not getting anything out of this. So I've did my research and I've produced podcasts in the past and webinars and said, you know, I'm going to try this. I want to talk to those people out there that are having the same issues that I'm having. And that's where we came up with Ghosted by the Machine, those real stories of humanity and the hiring process of how it's changed over the years. It's no longer, hey, Joe or Jill, thank you. I know you. Can you help me out? Here's my resume. You know, there's none of that anymore. You have to go through that process, and it's tough. It really is. The human element is gone.
It's very difficult. And even having, you know, being in a career for so long that you have and the relationships and the connections you have, it's got to be even extra frustrating going, wait a minute, I know people and I've been around and I've heard this from many candidates and hiring leaders, et cetera, myself. So I can definitely understand the frustration. So let's, for everyone else, what does ghosted mean? Like, what are you defining ghosted? And let's talk about it. It's obviously not the old, you know, mansion down the road with creaks and chains happening, but what is ghosted?
Well, ghosting used to happen at the application state. You used to apply for something and never hear back, but it's now filtered its way through the whole process. You know, you might apply for something and then 3 months later you get an email at 2-3 o'clock in the morning. I call it the Dear John letter. Thank you for applying, but we've already filled the position and we'll keep your resume on hand. But so you apply, you don't hear anything, or then you do hear something like 3 months later, or you get an interview. And I've had numerous interviews. I take the first interview, and it's usually a screening over the internet. It's no longer sitting down with somebody face to face. It's usually on the phone or on Zoom or Google Meet. And you go through that screening process, and then you wait. And then you wait. And you might not hear anything, which ghosting. Or you might hear everything and you go for the second interview and the third interview. And I've been on 2 or 3 of those where I've gone to 3 or 4 interviews, and then you don't hear anything for a month. And then you send a note, hey, what's going on? And then well, we're looking at another person. We appreciate your time. It's like, any feedback? Then there's no feedback. we really like your qualifications, but you're too qualified for us. Overqualified. That's the new term. Which
that's a whole nother topic.
That's
please.
a whole nother
topic.
topic.
That one.
Yeah, that's a whole nother one. So that ghosting is through every step of the way now, and talking with other individuals that are going through the same process. It's unbelievable that from not just me in Metro Detroit, but all over the world, they're getting this. They're feeling the same. They're getting the same. They're exhausted by the process.
Yeah, Mark, I think a lot of our audience can definitely relate. Of course, we've got people on the TA and HR side, and, there's lots of articles, right? Publications, maybe not so kind posts, right? About all of this ghosting and just kind of lack of clarity and, I guess, really productivity in the whole recruitment process, right? So I know there's frustration on both sides of it, of this. And to your point, on the candidate side of it, it's just mystifying to ever know really where you sit in the process. One of the things you brought up is that meeting an actual person in person is a thing of the past, or so it seems to be, at least at the early stages of the process. What we're even hearing from a lot of candidates is a machine's interviewing them, or a recording is happening where they're being asked questions by AI. So, you don't even really get that human opportunity to ask a person, what can I expect next? When will I hear from you? Right. So I think we could all relate to, this is a big problem. In fact, I know in some countries they're passing laws around ghosting, right? And of course, from what I know of working in a global organization for many years, generally in the US, we're not leaders in those areas, right? So I think we will maybe be a late follower as far as actually having laws, but I think lots of candidates out there can identify with this. I don't know how to crack this, right? I don't know how to get past this. And I know today we're going to dig in and peel back what some of those issues are. And I think we'd love to hear more about what you've learned, right? What you think, what we can do about this really, and how do we all move forward from here?
Sure. Now, you mentioned other countries. Canada, as of January 1st, enacted a law for ghosting. So if you go, you've got somebody applies that you've got so much time that you have to get back to them to let them know where they are in the process. If you don't, you can get fined. There are a lot of companies suffering right now that I'm finding out through my relationships and interviews, is that companies are look, we got to do something about this, because we're going to start losing customers because this is getting out there on the internet. And that's one thing about my show. I'm not trying to, it's not just the recruiters or the companies. It can be both sides of the table. I've worked with recruiters that have been so just on, hey, Mark, I need this now. Can you help me? Blah, 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 blah. But then you turn around and you've got to go through the scams that are out there too, of so-called recruiters. So when you get 5 or 6 of those a week, and they're telling you that they're a recruiter for Eli Lilly, and they turn out not to be, or for Amazon, or for Huntington Bank, and you're putting a couple hours into giving them information. It turns out it's a scam. It's really tough. The mental anguish and exhaustion of this process is difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Definitely.
those scams are really tough. Going into part of our podcast of stories, there was one company I worked for where we got notified later on that a candidate actually had an offer letter from us for a job, and turned over social security information, and we were like, we don't know what you're talking about. And we had to investigate and search into understanding what happened and what went on. And you're apologizing, but they never were contacted by anyone in HR or talent acquisition or anywhere. And then you're trying to backpedal, right? And trying to, how do you save face on that? Because it wasn't a big company like the ones you mentioned, but it was still, a brand reputation situation that went on that we felt bad about. But, there was also, unfortunately, that happened. The other side of ghosting, and I know we're talking about the company side, and I'm not trying to always defend TA, and TA is definitely at fault. Candidates ghost too, right? I've had it where candidates don't get back to me, and it's like, wait a minute, you applied, for example, or we were talking and we did the initial screen and now, hey, we want to interview, and there's no response. There's no call, there's no text message, there's no email, and so ghosting can happen across the whole board. There's strategies to solve some of it. I don't think we'll ever solve it completely because we're still human and AI isn't always great. And I know we'll dive into some of those things, but it is really happening across the board for everybody, unfortunately, in many different ways. So what, I guess in that sense, Mark, you've got some real hand with some of these conversations that you're having, where do you see that really, that experience that's happening right now? Like, what do you see? If you had to bucket them into a couple pieces, is there a glaring sore thumb there that maybe we want to dive into that everyone would be interested in from your analysis in these conversations?
Well, so I can say I've done over 40 interviews since October, and everywhere from Alaska all the way to Portugal. With everything in between. A couple in New York, couple in Chicago, Texas. Each area has a different different barrier through the process. So there's different things that people are going through. One gentleman's in his late 60s having an issue. He's older, and he's all about trying to get back in the workforce. I have someone that's has a barrier that's blind and has issues. Again, there's so many different issues. But the underlying issue that I hear is they apply and they hear nothing. And they've applied for 200, 300, 400, 500, 600 jobs. 600 jobs. I mean, that's crazy. And they're not, they get 2 or 3 interviews. But what we find, and what I've been thinking about really recently, lately, even for myself, is that my AI is competing with your AI. So if there's a job description, if you go to LinkedIn, you'll see these gentlemen or ladies, they'll post, this is how you use ChatGPT to get your resume or your cover letter rewritten for the new ATS cheese grater. So I'll go through and I've used that and I've tried that. It's great. My resume I think I've gone through 15 iterations in the last 9 months, right? And try to keep up with everything. And you look at that and you realize that, okay, I've got all the keywords in, I've got all the information, I have all the background, I have all the experience. What am I missing? Why am I not getting through that first round, at least to get the interview? If I fit this to a T and I can do this job, why am I not being contacted? What's the problem here? The problem is that my AI is competing with that AI, and there's some algorithm in there that's saying either I have too much experience or too little experience, or don't have this master's degree or bachelor's degree. So those algorithms, and you don't know. It's kind of like winning the lottery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
a bit of guesswork.
Yes.
Well, if you peel that back, and again, I'm not an expert on this, and every system, like you said, and every tool is different, but it does go back to what, and I've had this many conversations with a lot of folks, it's the job description. Now, the job description could be good, it could be bad, and it could be wrong, but the ATS systems are that's the tool that they're taking the information from, right? So if and then this is the oxymoron behind it, is if that's the job description that's posted and candidates are applying to that job description and it may match those, and then on the back end, the recruiter or the hiring manager that's reviewing those resumes go, that's not what I want, but that's what you put in. Right. So there is a mismatch there at times, and now that's not everybody. And then there's also an overload of applications. When you get a job with, that's opened in minutes and you've got hundreds, if not thousands of applications, it's processing through. Mm-hmm. Again, that's not even the ghost. That's just getting through the process and the system of it all to be able to see who's the right folks to go through that. Then someone still has to then go through that again, right? So some of them will get automatically declined, right? And you'll get that rejection hopefully soon. Sometimes the process is they don't let people know till the end. because then they close out the rec and then everyone gets notified or not. So
Yeah.
everyone's policies and procedures are a little different.
Yeah, and truthfully, I'm not sure all of the talent and HR people out there even know exactly how their system's working. I know one of our angles on our podcast is really sharing tales from the trenches, but I'm working with a colleague who I have a collaborative relationship with. We've never worked together. She's in the job market. She applied for a position, and very quickly got a notification saying, yeah, sorry, you're not qualified. You're not getting an interview. 3 days later, I get a note from her. She's like, hey, crazy turn of events here. But guess what? I actually am getting an interview for this position. And I said, well, I believe exactly what happened was you applied. You didn't rise up and get the right score to meet the criteria. The system automatically notified you that you're not a candidate. However, the human who actually looked at it, kind of decided, yeah, I want to talk to you. So, like I said, I'm not even sure that, people out there working in HR and talent acquisition understand exactly how their systems are working. The good news is in this case that the person is getting the opportunity, right? And the human intervened here, right? And,
That's interesting.
The machine apparently didn't necessarily do the best vetting here, right?
Right.
Well, that's really interesting too, Jill, because usually the recruiter or that human wouldn't even look at that bucket, right? If they've been disqualified, you kind of, to save time, and recruiters are lazy, and I've said this on other episodes, so don't shoot the messenger, guys. We are. If there's an automatically disqualified, you filter for the qualified folks if you set up your system that way. But you're right, that filtering action that I don't think everybody knows, because everybody doesn't know how it actually gets programmed either. And I've had this conversation is, how is that actually happening? And we don't really know. It's interesting.
I would say in this case, the answer to that question is through human connection and basically figuring out who are people in this company that I know, right? And then in essence, that person actually gets looked at because a human said, hey, I know this person. I think they'd be a good fit. You should take a look, right? So it's just a clear example of the machine isn't always right? This human element of it is a critical piece of it. I know we talk about it all the time, and it's how do you find that right kind of mix, right? And how do you find the right balance of where we kind of put human attention and not human attention? So again, complicated for sure.
And that's another part of ghosting, to be honest, right? Is, everyone's applying to all these jobs. The managers in talent acquisition and human resources are getting inundated by folks reaching out to them saying, hey, I applied, I'm interested, can we talk? And then your person got through, which is awesome, right? I'm glad they're getting an interview. That's another frustration that people are having, I'm sure, in the market of, hey, I know people there and they're still not getting back to me, right? And I don't know how to solve that one either because everyone's workload is crazy. Right. So it's another situation that's going on.
Also, I had a couple people that have years experience and they don't have the correct degree. Mm-hmm. And it'll say, bachelor's degree, X amount or related experience, but they're still not getting in. So and again, they don't know. They don't know. No one knows. No one's getting that feedback. If you could only understand what the algorithm is really looking for, it would help. It would.
So if you're out there listening and you know the algorithm, please let us know. Share the secret sauce.
I'm trying to share the secret like the Masons.
Yeah. So we're talking about the negative side of things. So how can we help? What do we think solutions, options, ways that whether it's a company, a person, the recruiter, the HR, even the candidate, what can we do as a whole, as a community to, fix this and make it better? Besides, obviously, we know the algorithm and the systems, but what else is out there?
Face to face, that human element. You had mentioned earlier, Jill, about doing an interview with AI, and I got a story for you. I got a call I got an email saying that they want to interview me, and here's the number. Call this number for an interview. I call up. It's an AI person. They're going to give me. They do the prompt. There's going to be 6 questions, real nice voice. I'm like, wow, this doesn't sound like AI. And I got through the first 2 questions, blink, phone went off. What do? I email back. I only got through the first 2 questions and the phone went click. Never heard back. Never heard back. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? I don't know. But that's just me. I've had other people tell me the same thing. So it's just incredible. But I just
AI interviewing is interesting, and I haven't had it happen to, when I was interviewing, it's never been a thing, and I think certain roles have it, but that's a whole other topic to that we could probably go into. I've heard it, I've seen it, but
it's almost like doing a Zoom interview with someone. During COVID, we did a lot of that in the business communication business, and people were very awkward and didn't know what to do and how do I handle this. So it was a whole new realm. Same thing. We're not prepared for this, and I actually believe we're not prepared for the AI revolution of hiring. I think it was just kind of, okay, here it is. Bloop.
Let's try this and put it in let's put it in there because it's going to save time and money. Let's do it and not fully understand how it all works.
Yeah. And I've got some other things that, we'll bring up, and I'd love to talk to you about something I heard from one of my interviews about human capital, and see what you think of that too. You heard of that? No,
go ahead.
So human capital, I spoke to a young lady out in California. So when you apply, you give them your resume, and your resume has your email address and your phone number. And we all get spam phone calls. We all get those spam emails. But I can tell you this, since I've been unemployed and since I've been applying for all these jobs, I get 10 to 15 phone calls a day regarding, would you like a loan? How was your medical insurance? Things that I'm like, where is this coming from? Same thing with my email. So I was speaking with her, I was talking to her about it, and she said, yeah, a lot of these companies, they have an abundance of resumes, but then they sell that information. It's like human capital to these companies for them to then reach out to us. Wow. And it's something else I learned over the last couple months of doing my interview.
Jill, how does that play in the HR world?
Well, other than me saying it's very disturbing, do I believe it happens 100%, right? How does it play? I mean, I would say legally, there's probably some disclaimer somewhere in the system that you're completing the information that, signs away your rights to have any recourse. How are you going to track down they did it, they sold it, where it came from, especially when you're in the position of applying, like Mark said, to 100 jobs a week, right? Mm-hmm. So I would just say hugely problematic, sad situation as far as preying on people who are in, a difficult journey. The mental health aspects of going through this journey are not to be minimized. I would say I've seen it myself. I've been in job search modes. I worked for a company that was going through bankruptcy, and I would see that even just the praying, I was offended by the amount of solicitations I received from people who were trying to sell me resume services, right? All kinds of coaching services. I mean, I was bothered by those things and saying, hey, most people in these situations don't have the financial means to maybe be considering those things. Now, maybe that's a controversial topic. I know there's a lot of wonderful and legitimate people out there, but how people mine that information is what offended me. Not that there are people out there trying to market themselves to do meaningful work and collect, earn a paycheck, right? So do I believe it's happening? 1,000%. I believe it's happening, and it's disturbing. And I think all you can say is everyone really needs to be thoughtful and careful. Like, I know from my experience, certain software would not accept my resume because it didn't have my address on it. Well, guess what? Wow. I'm not telling you where I live. I'm not telling every person out there where I live. I might put a zip code on it, right? So then we all have to make a choice. What are we comfortable sharing and what are we not comfortable sharing about ourselves? But For sure, I believe it's happening. It's disturbing. And I think we all have to be guarded about people taking information we provide them and using it for their own means. So.
Well, they do is when you fill out the online applications, it'll say at the end, this is going to be reviewed by AI. Is that a problem? Yes or no? And you can opt out in some cases on some of them. I think it's Workday allows you to do that, which is very prevalent. So it all depends. I didn't know that putting your that information in your address. I got to think of that one. I'm gonna try that sometime. See what that.
But does. Hypothetically, like I'm a job candidate and I'm applying to this company who's using Workday, which is a very reputable company, and it says, "Do you want to opt out of AI?" The question I have as a candidate is saying, if I opt out of AI, does that mean anyone's ever even looking at my resume? Like, what does that really mean? And I feel like companies really need to make that a lot clearer, that it's only for their internal use. It won't be used by a third party or sold to a third party, etc. But I believe most candidates would feel the pressure to say that they want AI to review it because they don't want to miss out on the opportunity to be considered for the job. But maybe you guys see that differently. I don't know. What do you think?
So I don't know the full details behind it. It would be good to hear, but I know a piece of that would be the tool that they have, which will then help rank or sort through the AI machine algorithm we're talking about, right? So if it doesn't, then it's going to be into a bucket, and I would hope, again, I haven't seen it firsthand, that means it's not in a category of, I don't want to say labeled, of where that person would rank versus the job description. And I'm assuming it's not if you opt out of it, the AI is not running it and you're not going to have a score in a sense, right? On that side of it. I'm guessing, and I don't know. If somebody knows that firsthand, please comment and let us know, because that would be really interesting. But I do want to go back to one little thing on building the trust and the communication back and that confidence. I'm going to speak on the TA side because I can, and and I'm not just standing up for us because I've done it and do it, but it's a lot of communication and there's a lot of things going on, right? If you peel back the layers, you have thousands of applications, and it's like, how do you go through them? How do you look through the candidates and then contact them and work through that? So I would expect a lot of candidates don't get communicated until they're interested, right? So unfortunately, yes, you're applying into the old school black hole until somebody reaches out to you. And then what it is you're setting up that expectation. And that's a both way, right? So if you got reached out to, this is what's going on, this is our interview process, this is what we're going to do next, this is when I'm going to follow up, this is when I need you to follow up with me, and be patient and build that trust together. And that's usually after a conversation. And I know that's not necessarily the most part where ghosting happens, but that's where I believe recruiters can do the best, triage to be able to help support the situation, right? And be honest, here's where we're at, here's the interview, here's what I'm going to follow up, here's when I can get feedback, here's what to expect. And then the candidate can do the same. And then that at least voids out the next steps of the ghosting, but the black hole piece of the front end, that's a separate problem. But on the recruiting and TA side, it's just, you got to think recruiters are working, again, every company is different, 10, 20, 30. I've heard more requisitions at once. And each requisition has potentially numerous applicants, or they're going out and reaching out to them and managing through that. And each of those requisitions usually have a hiring manager and a team and a process behind it all. So again, I'm not saying feel sorry for the TA person. That's our job. It's understanding what's going on, and it's most important for you to get that job, but it's also they're working through all of these avenues that are happening. And I guess I just want to peel that back so everyone understands what's really going on. And doesn't matter what size of a company you're at, right? Whether it's a small business or a large corporation, that's the world of the recruiter. They're working through all of these things. And that's where AI helps us. Scheduling, right? Getting a link to set up a schedule. I use it all the time. Right? Set up the time. Let's go. I don't have to go back and forth, right? How do you move through these things? And that's why when I say recruiters are lazy, it's how do we optimize so we could do more? And that's hopefully helps understand where everything's coming from.
There's good and bad applicants. There's good and bad TAs. Have I heard good stories? Yes. Have I heard bad stories? Yes. Have I had a good experience with TAs? Yes, I have. But then I've also had one that was like, look, you told me you'd get back to me, and it's been 2 weeks. What happened? Oh, I'm sorry, this happened, and I have gallbladder surgery or this. Look, I'm a person too. Just send me a quick text message. I'm really sorry. I had my gallbladder taken out, which wasn't the case, but it's communication. 75% of communication is listening. I've learned that from my wife. Okay. You have to listen, and you have to understand what they're telling you, and you have to be. That's what we've lost. We've lost that human element touch.
Right.
And you used to be, job fairs I think we've all gotten lazy with this computer, with doing the Zoom calls and all of that. It's really difficult. It's difficult.
Mark, I'm nodding and kind of saying, yeah, I hear you. I feel like we've gotten away from just basic human decency communication. I know Joe and I have tackled multiple topics on our podcast alone about how to simplify the recruitment process, right? How do we get away from these 8 interviews and all these panels, right? How do we drive success and run a lean, efficient process, right? But I think this element of human decency, and one of the things I like to say is, if I'm on the other side of this, how would I want to be treated, right? And what experience do I want to create, for this person, knowing I've been on the other side of this search, right? And how can we get back to basics here in some sense and not blame it all on the complexity of algorithms and the machine, right? We all have some control, right? And we have some simple actions we can take to move along the process, not keep people waiting, right? And just have that human element of communication and decency you're referring to.
Yeah, no, I'm happy that, interviews are going back in person. It's not the first ones or maybe even the second interview, but a lot of companies are requesting on-site interviews at least, so you can shake somebody's hand, talk to them, have a conversation, see and feel, versus all through, virtual conversation. So it's not fully there. I think we're meeting them a quarter of the way there on the face-to-face, but 100%, guys, communication is key everywhere, right? In every aspect, every role, every function. We've talked about it many times, Jill.
Yeah, and truthfully, I would just say honesty goes a long way, even if it's not flattering. As an example, I might tell a candidate, I hope to get back to you next week, but in fairness, I have to reconvene with 3 people. One of them's traveling. Some of this will depend on their schedule, right? So I may tell them, I just need to be honest and upfront and say, this may take longer than you or I would like, but I'm just being honest with you. And what I always tell people is, if you need to know something before I reach back to you, please let me know, right? If you have another offer, another decision, if you're at a crux point, decision-making point, and you haven't heard from me, reach out to me. I think those are just simple, basic principles we can all follow when sometimes things are out of our own control, right? And we don't know what to tell that person, but to tell them something that like that and saying, I don't know exactly, this is what I'm thinking the timeline will be, but if you need to talk to me before then, please reach out, right? Exactly. And then really when they reach out, tell them where it is, even if it's like, yep, sorry, we're still waiting, right? Some communication. It may not be the yes or the no that they want to hear, right? But that follow-up instead of the dodging, which I think is just a societal problem, right? People seem to just be more elusive and not wanting to, I think ghosting's not only in this world, it's everywhere, right? Someone reaches out to you, you don't want to talk to them about it. You just kind of, move on to the next thing. So
sweep it under the rug, right?
I did have a real, I didn't get the job, but I felt really good that I had an HR person reach out to me and say, look, I've got this position. I know who you are through somebody. It's real. This is really quick. I need your resume. It's for this job. They'd like to make a decision the 1st of January. I know this is Christmas. And I said, look, I'll do the best I can, whatever you need from me. Gave her the information. And she called me right back. Perfect. This is exactly what they're looking for. You're going to be in the second round. I've already given them 3 candidates. I really think you've got something different for this. And she says, I'll be calling you for an interview. I did the interview. Half hour later, she called me back. I just want to thank you for doing this. Just want to let you know that they're moving on to another candidate. You didn't have X, Y, and Z, which I totally understand. I was kind of the wild card. I wasn't in that realm, but I've dealt with it before. I've got transferable skills, she said, which I did. I felt like I could do this job. Mm-hmm. Is it where I want to be? Probably not, but hey, it's a job these days. But she called me back. She says, I know this is not going to make your holiday, but I just want to let you know. And she was totally honest. I totally got it. And I said, look, I really appreciate it. This was nice. This was good. This got me prepared. So
absolutely.
So how do we help, right? How do we, what kind of strategies can we share for candidates to navigate in this side of things? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's not changing today or tomorrow or in the next few weeks. The biggest thing I've learned is you need to take a mental break from this. This is a job to look for a job. It really is. It's a lot of hard work. You've got to put your time in. You definitely have to learn some AI. You definitely have to learn that. It's not going anywhere. You have to reach out to your network. I think networking is so important. I constantly reaching out to my network, and they reach back out. They're not ghosting me. At least I know. At least not for now. But networking and using your contacts. Get that old Rolodex out if you have to.
Yeah, Mark. One question there for you. To me, networking could mean there's lots of different aspects of it. Could be people that you've worked with before. It could be people in the recruiting world that you might be hiring. It could be people that are also going through this job search experience who could be just a good person to vent with, right? So maybe you could talk a little bit there about what you found is the right recipe for you of how to spend that time.
Well, you say venting, that's pretty much what the show is. That's Ghosted by the Machine. I give them 5 questions. Tell me a little about yourself. Tell me how the process has been. Can you give any advice to other people that are in the same way? Do you have any hope? And it's amazing the stories that they tell me in the 5 to 10 minutes that we talk. And I feel like we're now friends after we finish this conversation, because they talk about their family. They talk about God. And they talk about what they've gone through. And again, we've talked about the process and being ghosted and stuff. But the one thing I've learned is you need to take a mental break. Because you're focused on this. At least I know I am. And everyone I've talked to, same thing. They're so focused. We're all on LinkedIn. We're all posting. We're all commenting. And you see it every day. Open to work, open to work, open to work. And once, that's on, you're fair game. But I truly believe, from my experience in these last 9 months, the biggest thing is relying on my family, my faith, and taking a mental break once in a while and just enjoying life a little bit. Play with my dogs, go look at the sunshine, take a deep breath, because the sun's going to come out tomorrow, and I truly believe something good's going to come out of it. Maybe this podcast is my next step. I'm not sure, but I tell you that I love the stories. I don't like the fact that they're out of work, but I love communicating with these people.
Yeah, one thing I will say that I took away from being on the other end of a search is really having more empathy, having more willingness and more conviction about giving opportunities to people in search, perhaps over people that are currently working.
Yeah.
So I want to share a couple ideas, early thoughts for everyone on this. And we talk about quality over quantity, and in a couple different ways. Everyone says, well, let's just apply for everything, right? And it may make you feel good because you applied for 100 jobs that day, but it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help and I'm not just speaking for the TA side of things and the folks that are, or HR that's going through that, or hiring managers. It doesn't help the system. It doesn't help ghosting. It doesn't help the whole situation across. If you are not qualified for the role, I really strongly say, pass, or that gives you mechanisms to then be qualified for those roles if that's where you're going, and if that's what you want to get to, and maybe it's a shift in your career, then that's where you get the opportunity to network and build relationships to be able to then be qualified for those positions, right? Or work your way in another way. But just applying to apply, you know, I don't think is a great success for everyone. It doesn't, I don't think it helps increase your chances. Now, obviously, if you're almost there, absolutely apply, right? That makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, for everybody listening, and we just talked about it, is, you know, you might be working, but take those calls, do the networking yourself, right? It's building that up, helping somebody else, listening to the story, taking that 20 minutes to have the conversation and network with, whether it's somebody that's looking for a job or trying to navigate or get in touch with somebody, it pays back. I mean, it's such powerful. I have conversations, you know, again, I don't allocate a specific number of hours per week because it just depends. But I talk to a variety of people, whether it's a LinkedIn message, an email, a text message, or a face-to-face conversation. You know, it's giving back, it's helping support it. And a lot of it is honestly some of this stuff that we talk about in this call, in this podcast, but it's sharing those things, it's listening, giving those tips and tricks. So it's beneficial. It's a great feeling to be able to help somebody, and it's not looking for something in return except trying to help somebody down the path. And, you know, so for folks that are going through this, it's frustrating, it's hard. I agree with you, Mark. You've got to take time away, right? It's a job, so take the weekend, right? Or you can do that. You're allowed to, right? Because you have to clear that mental head, right? You do that when you work. You do that when you're unemployed to be able to go through those things. So it's and rely on your friends and your family. So I agree with you guys on all of those aspects of it.
You brought up quality, and I wrote that down because I want to make sure I talk about that. Because I've talked to a lot of people that, I applied for 1,000 jobs, and I'm like, okay, that's great. You applied for you get a sticker for that. You get a gold star. I believe in, this is who I am. This is the job I am looking for. And I have actually used AI to say, okay, this is my job description. This is where I want to be. Where should I go? Can you give me some input? I mean, look, if we're going to be using AI to apply for jobs, let's see how it can help me develop my direction in my profession. So I've done that a few times just to kind of make sure I'm focused on what I'm looking for. And I'm not applying for, you know, this position here, just because I had this component. No. It's got, I need the full bucket. I want the full enchilada there. So I make sure, and I've talked to some people the same thing, quality. Because if you're thinking about rolling the dice, you're going to be doing this a long time.
Mark, I can't help but ask, since you were kind to be a guest on our podcast, and I think you're fantastic, I would love to hear what you are looking for, because I think you're a great catch for any company out there.
Well, again, I started out in broadcasting. So I was a multimedia producer at the Palace of Auburn Hills. I started that, got into television. I was hired at Channel 4 as a sports producer. Got married, decided that wasn't the really profession that I wanted to get into. A little bit too much.
Work-life balance issues, probably.
Yes, there you go. And I just couldn't juggle it. I'm also a part-time musician too. And I wanted a family. So I got into, I was doing some commercial work for a PR firm, and I went to them and said, look, I've been doing this for a while, freelancing. I like to get a job. You guys got anything here? We were hoping you'd say that. So I worked at a company called Mark's Lane Public Relations, and cut my teeth, learned how to do a press release. Never worked in public relations. I do not have a degree in public relations or communications, but they taught me how to write a press release. They taught building relationships for me is very easy, and communicating and being creative. So I fit real well, which led me to working in nonprofits. Again, I've worked for a company called Mortcrim Communications, where I developed communication plans, crisis communications for the water department here in Detroit, worked for government organizations, worked for Ford, internal communications at General Motors. Most recently, I was at Salvation Army, helping them with their marketing communications for the state of Michigan. and, now currently doing a podcast.
Well,
So
I would
that's what
just
I'm
say
looking
it's
to get
clear
into.
that life happened in a way that you found your passion and you found your place where you fit in the world, where you get a lot out of what you do. And I'm confident that that's going to happen for you again.
Well, thank you.
So I think PR and comms is the perfect place for you. Anyone out there who's looking, give Mark a call. We can put you in touch with Mark. But thanks for sharing that story, because I think it's such a common turn of events, right? And I think it's really tells a lot about you kind of taking this journey you're going through yourself and really wanting to share that experience, make sure other people have that platform to tell their story. So I think it's fantastic.
It was interesting when I got into this profession, or started in the profession. I had someone that pulled me aside, a mentor, and said, get as many tools as you can for your toolbox. Okay. That's what I've done. I've built this very large Black & Decker toolbox sitting back there that I utilize. And what's interesting now that I'm finding that, how do I translate that into AI on my resume? So I don't get pushed aside because they say, well, he's got too much experience, overqualified. So these are things I'm trying to myself personally to navigate through the process.
Yeah, so you have to develop the right mini toolbox for that application to make sure that it's the right fit.
Yes. So how do you handle that in your profession? How would you handle that?
For me, it was very clear as I started looking for a job and I was marketing myself, what I was attracting, and what was coming my way was a very different than what I wanted to do. So that feedback to me, right? I had a lot of operations experience. I had a lot of manufacturing experience. I was getting all these HR opportunities that were more turnaround companies, right? They need to go through reorgs, right? And it wasn't the work I wanted to do. Am I capable of doing? Have I done it? Absolutely. But it wasn't where I wanted to be next in my career. So that told me that I needed to rebrand my resume. I'm not lying. I'm taking things out that I don't want to advertise, right? I feel like you do attract what you are. So for me, that was just an experience I had where some of the market and what it was looking for me to do and the roles that were coming to me told me that I should rebrand, myself and my LinkedIn profile to target more and emphasize the work that I did that I want to continue to do versus that, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, I understand.
So I think all of those things tell you a little bit about how the world sees you. There's different ebbs and flows in the market that are, times when more skills are in more demand, right? So there was probably a demand for those skills at that time, and that's why those things were coming to me. But I think listening to all of that and having intention around how do you take that feedback? What do you do with that information, right? And how do I attract what I want to have? That's an example of how I did that. And then I think also just having recruiters talk to you about what do they see? What jumps out at them, right? So it's almost about spinning the right angle to kind of lead you down that path you want to take with your career and your profession.
And that's a great way to learn how to use AI as well.
Yep.
Right. And, what is AI? How does it read your resume? And you got to use different AI tools to that. So getting the feedback, understanding the different pieces, putting your resume in there, asking it different questions. So all those different prompts. And I've done that with a candidate because he couldn't tell me what he wanted to do or what he did. I solved problems. Well, great. But what are you going to do? And what is that role? And I literally had to do it for him. I put it in AI and this is what it spit out, man. And he's like, oh, I didn't see that, right? And how is it perceived by this person? So you have to play with it in a different way to be able to get there. And there's so many different pieces.
Joe, one thing I think you're saying that I think is really important for people to understand, you are not the best person to do this for yourself. You kind of need a partner because you have blind spots. And in essence, I think some of what you were describing with that individual could have just been we just kind of get stuck on our own stuff, right? So having a partner, having a accountability partner, someone else who's just an impartial sounding board to kind of help you facilitate those things, I think is really great advice. and maybe something I wish I had done sooner, thinking I'm an HR professional, right? Thinking I know more than other people about certain things. We all need that, no matter what our background and experiences. We all need that impartial other person to help us.
Definitely. I've had to rewrite my summary many times because I saw myself this way, where I've talked to other people. No, Mark, you need to be strategic. You have to have this in there. You need to say this. This is what you did. This is how I would frame it. So yes, that's great. I love that. Love those thoughts.
And it's getting somebody that doesn't know you to do that, right? Whether it's a recruiter, a coach, a mentor, someone else. And I'm not trying to sell coaching services by anybody, but someone that doesn't know you.
We know some great ones.
I do too. It helps, right? And it helps showcase that. So, I mean, I think, guys, we could go on forever on this side of it. I think the quick summary, and not just to wrap it up a little bit, is it's frustrating. It's a journey that you have to go through in this whole times. Don't, do what you want to happen on your side versus the other, right? So the ghosting side, so don't ghost if you're not going to ghost, and communicate. We really emphasize the communication piece, the networking, and really just trying to, do the right thing ultimately. That's a quick summary. Jill, anything I missed on that?
No, I would agree. I think the basic advice of treat people the way you want to be treated, realizing we don't have perfect systems. We can use our own common sense and judgment to really drive better outcomes. And I think, to Mark's point, that really all starts with communication and transparency and openness, right? So that would be my takeaway. I agree with Mark. These systems aren't going away. How do we just move the needle in the right direction and kind of course correct and create better outcomes for the candidates out there?
Mark, we really appreciate you joining us. It was an awesome conversation.
Yeah.
Good luck with the podcast in a way of sharing people's stories. Hopefully they get viewed and be able to have opportunities for them, have that place to vent, which is really key for individuals going through this journey. Obviously, we hope the best for yourself as you move through your journey side of it. And but we really appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. Any last words on your side?
Well, thank you both for having me on. I really appreciate it. I had a chance to vent. This is great. I really appreciate it. Longer than 5 minutes. I just think, what you just said, Jill, and you summed it up perfectly. It's not going anywhere. We just need to bring that human element back into it somewhere. We need to find a way to bring it back, shift it a little bit, bring that human element back. And I tell everybody, let's try to make hiring human again. Please bring it back. That's my wish.
Absolutely. From your lips to God's ears, and may 2026 be the year of bringing human back into the process.
Thank you again so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Like, follow, and share the podcast. And until next time, we will see you soon.